Favorite moments in Shakespeare. Hello, this is Leo Rockas, and I'd like to tell you some of my favorite moments in Shakespeare. For this little talk, you don't need to know much about Shakespeare or even ever have heard of him, though I think most people have heard of him. My mother, who was a very simple woman, thought that Shakespeare was a field of study like history or biology. And she wasn't that far wrong. So I'd like to begin with an early play, possibly the first one he wrote by himself without any collaborator, The Taming of the Shrew. And I do think this one is pretty widely known as the story of how Petruchio tamed the terrible shrew Catherine or Kate. But the play does not begin with Petruchio searching for a wife. It begins with a drunken idler asleep in a tavern, Christopher Sly. Along comes a lord who has been out hunting with his huntsman and his beautiful dogs, and he has a sudden impulse. What if we take this drunkard and put him, cleanly dressed, in a sumptuous bed, in a luxurious bedroom hung with sensual tapestries? The Lord seems to be describing his own bedroom. And try to convince him he is in a terrible delusion, that he is only a drunken idler from a tavern. And some players have come who will soon put on a play that Christopher is going to watch. Christopher wakes up and tries to convince the servants around his bed that he belongs in a tavern. They assure him that he is a lord with a strange delusion. And the Lord has a further inspiration. What if we supply him with a wife lamenting his delusion? Now, it is pretty well known that the ladies in Shakespeare's plays were played by boys whose voices were still high. But the Lord, instead of choosing a boy from the visiting players to be Christopher's wife, chooses his own page, Bartholomew. And here we are treated to the only place in all of Shakespeare's plays of a boy being gotten up to play a lady. He will be dressed like a lady and taught to behave like a lady. If he has to cry, he can be given an onion wrapped in a napkin. The boys in the visiting company would need no onion, when the magnificent ladies they play later on would have to be seen weeping. Bartholomew plays Christopher's wife very well, until Christopher says, "Madam, undress you and come now to bed." And suddenly Christopher's wife becomes for a moment the boy playing her, who is not very comfortable with the idea of getting into bed with the man playing Christopher. He begs off for a night or two on the grounds that his physicians have cautioned against Christopher being tried too soon, which might bring on his earlier malady. There is only one other place in all the plays where a boy playing a lady admits for a moment to being a boy, when Rosalind, in the epilogue to As You Like It, says, "If I were a woman, he would kiss as many of the men as he liked." Christopher agrees to the delay, protesting nevertheless that "it stands so I may hardly tarry so long." The idea that Christopher would experience bodily discomfort over this boy playing his wife is no more preposterous than that, in other plays, the idea that so many heroes would fall in love with the boys playing Christopher's magnificent ladies, Shakespeare's magnificent ladies. And so we come to the connection between the so-called induction of Christopher Sly and the play of The Taming itself. And we can ask, Is this a necessary connection? There is certainly a need for some play for Christopher to watch, probably a comedy. But must it be just this one? No, it could be any other, such as A Comedy of Errors, or Much Ado About Nothing, or As You Like It. And we can ask the question another way. Must the play about taming be preceded by just this account of Christopher Sly? Here the answer is clearly no, as evidenced by the taming play, often nicely played just by itself. But there is plenty of fun in both the induction and the play that follows, so why not connect them? Petruchio has to survive a good many taunts from the lady he is trying to woo, Catherine. But my favorite moment comes when he takes up the real complaints men have made against her and pretends to deny them all. Here's what he says. "Nay, not a whit. I find you passing gentle. 'Twas told me you were rough and coy and sullen, and now I find report a very liar. For thou art pleasant, gamesome, passing courteous, but slow in speech, yet sweet as springtime flowers. Thou canst not frown, thou canst not look askance, nor bite the lip as angry wenches will, nor canst thou pleasure to be cross in talk. But thou with mildness entertainst thy wooers, with gentle conference, soft and affable." Then he adds a new complaint against her that he has entirely made up. "Why does the world report that Kate doth limp? O slanderous world! Kate, like the hazel twig, is straight and slender, and is brown in hue as hazelnuts, and sweeter than the kernels. Oh, let me see thee walk, thou dost not halt." This entirely fabricated complaint takes her by surprise. She does not scream, for instance, that no one has ever made such a complaint against her. She is left in a state we call rendered speechless. Not quite. Here is what she actually says. "Go, fool, and whom thou keepest command." A very weak response, little more than, "Shut up, you silly fool." And can we then say that though Petruchio is still in for some pretty rough language from Kate, that from this turning point on, his later success is assured, that from this point on, she finds him interesting? If we now make a long skip to the surprise ending, we must consider the objection of modern ladies to that speech of Kate's complete submission to Petruchio. But aren't modern ladies insulting the memory of the ladies in the first audiences? There were plenty of ladies in Shakespeare's time and in his plays who insist on their rights, some of whom are now going home thinking, "What a fool she was to give in so completely." While the men in the audience are for their part going home thinking, "He'll be sorry after believing all those false assurances." But the women and the men objecting to the ending, then and now, are not attending sufficiently to, are not respectful enough of the myth of the play itself. In order for this complete taming of this worst of shrews, it was necessary to turn the story inside out to make the shrew entirely compliant to the demanding husband. In many of the plays to come, comedies and tragedies, there arise problems of inappropriate or inconvenient love. Problems to be solved either happily or unhappily, and explaining the widely observed phenomenon that she or he, who is fully in love with someone, is now fully in love with someone else and has no eyes for the former one. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare gives us an explanation for these disjunctions. There's a mischievous creature named Puck who flies around potential lovers with a flower called love and idleness, the juice of which, when squeezed on the eyes of a given man or woman, causes them to fall in love with the next person of the seemingly opposite sex they see, no matter whom they previously loved, for sometimes the one seen and newly loved does not live up to appearances. Romeo does completely forget Rosaline after he sees Juliet, but the person visiting Olivia in Twelfth Night, with whom Olivia falls in love, is not, it turns out, the boy, the page named Cesario, that she sees, but the Lady Viola, disguised as a page, who says of Olivia's love, "I am a man, if it be so as 'tis. Poor lady, she were better love a dream." Cleopatra, now that she has seen and is madly in love with Antony, threatens her maid Charmian with bloody teeth if she dares to mention again her former love Caesar. Now she has love only for Antony. Watch out for pansies. They are love and idleness. But perhaps these innocent flowers have this power only if Puck is squeezing them on someone's eyes. In As You Like It, there are many mysteries and secrets of love, as mostly supervised by the magnificent Rosalind, whose mysteries and secrets are too many and too complicated to take up on the present occasion. We begin the play more simply, with Orlando complaining that his older brother has denied him the legacy he was due from his father. So he and the old servant Adam, a role supposedly played by Shakespeare himself, head off for the Forest of Arden, with the full-grown Shakespeare, however unlikely, on Orlando's back. And Puck has apparently been at work on both Rosalind and Orlando at the moment they see each other. After Orlando has defeated the champion wrestler Charles, Rosalind tells Orlando he has wrestled well and overthrown more than his enemies, while Orlando admits he is quite overthrown by the sight of Rosalind. Soon enough, however, Phoebe, the shepherdess, played as usual by a boy, falls in love with Ganymede, the boy played by Rosalind, also played by a boy. But Phoebe, too, is in love with a dream. Critics have not made much of how Shakespeare, a couple of times, inserted a character in a play with his own name. Seems to me if I inserted a character in a play with my name of Leo, I would make something rather special about that character. At any rate, one William comes into this play later on, and he is of some interest for being a completely unnecessary character to the story of the play, as if some player might have pleaded for, that is, Shakespeare decided to include, possibly himself, a role in the staging. William serves only to show how the clown Touchstone can rise foolishly superior to simple townsfolk, which has already been shown. William and the dialogue surrounding him could be completely eliminated, and has perhaps sometimes been eliminated, with a loss, however, of what he contributes. Poor William has been touched by Puck in his view of the foul Audrey, but she has already been claimed by Touchstone, who now threatens to kill this rival William 150 ways for his presumption. He tells William to tremble and depart. And William does depart with a friendly, submissive, "God rest you merry, sir," to Touchstone, making him the only young man in all the plays who ends up willingly agreeing to end up with no mate. But if my surmise is right, Shakespeare himself played William, and having played the old man Adam, now has come up from backstage in a new youthful guise. Think of it, the famous playwright, he was already well known, playing a simpleton who gives up his love to a clown. When first introduced, he admits to being 25, and when the clown Touchstone asks, "Is thy name William?" he humbly answers, "William, sir." In that line, "William, sir," we are closer to Shakespeare, no matter who is playing William, than in any number of facts about his birth, baptism, coat of arms, or retirement. William admits to having a pretty wit, which we can certainly acclaim 1,000 times over. I will close with a glance at the greatest hero of English history in the play of King Henry V, he who conquered France, which was later lost to his unheroic son, Henry VI. The night before his greatest achievement, the Battle of Agincourt, the king disguises himself with the cloak of Sir Thomas Erpingham to engage, disguised, in talk with ordinary soldiers. And he meets the soldiers John Bates, Alexander Court, and not William this time, but Michael Williams, who faces and defies the king himself, albeit disguised. In the role of Williams, I cannot believe Shakespeare would have given up to anyone else. The king argues that the king's cause being just and his quarrel honorable. Williams answers what every man in every war might be thinking. That's more than we know. He says, the king has a heavy reckoning to make. It will be a black matter for the king when all those legs and arms and heads are chopped off in a battle. Henry, or the man wearing Sir Thomas's cloak, is anxious to plead on behalf of the king. He says, if a son or a servant or an agent of the king misbehaves on an errand and dies as a result, it cannot be the fault of the father, the master, or the king. The king is not bound to answer the particular endings of his soldiers, the father of his son, nor the master of his servant, for they purpose not their deaths when they propose their services. Besides, he argues, soldiers, sons, or servants may be guilty of sins quite apart from those who are sent them on errands. Those sins are entirely their own. The king is not guilty. It is surprising the extent to which Shakespeare felt it necessary to fashion a justification for the king, alongside having fashioned such a challenge to him as Williams's. But he may leave us thinking, hadn't the soldier gone out on the king's errand? If he hadn't been sent out, he would be in no danger. So is not the king actually responsible for the errand he ordered? The more compliant Bates accepts the validation of the king. 'Tis certain, he says, every man that dies ill, the ill is upon his own head. The king is not to answer it. This answer satisfies the man in the cloak, and he makes an additional point in the king's favor. I myself, he says, heard the king say he would not be ransomed. That is, in case of a defeat, he would not pay a fee to be spared his own life, no matter how many of his soldiers he sacrificed. Williams does not accept this claim. Aye, he said so, to make us fight more cheerfully, but when our throats are cut, he may be ransomed and we ne'er the wiser. The king slips and forgets he is arguing with a commoner and imagines he is having an aristocratic argument. If I live to see it, he says, I will never trust his word after. Williams cannot let this pass. You pay him then. That's a perilous shot out of an elder gun that a poor and a private displeasure can do against a monarch. You may as well go about to turn the sun to ice with fanning in his face with a peacock's feather. You'll never trust his word after. Come, 'tis a foolish saying. And he is right. It is a foolish saying. And who is winning this argument anyway? And mustn't we take care? The monarchy itself is teetering, or at least the justification for the monarchy is teetering, and has never come closer to being disavowed. The king, it seems, cannot now come up with a real answer to Williams. He only dismisses him, saying, "Your reproof is something too round." He might be thinking too sound. "I should be angry with you," he says, "if the time were convenient." And the two agree, commoner and king, as it turns out, to a later argument for which they exchange gauges, here their gloves. Later, after the king has ordered the throats cut of all the friends captured, the two do meet again, and this time the king is indeed the king. Williams is wearing the glove he got in his cap and identifies his previous antagonist, who was the king in disguise, this way to the king himself. "And please your majesty, a rascal that swaggered with me last night, who, if I live and ever dare to challenge this glove, I have sworn to take him a box of the ear, or if I can see my glove in his cap, which he swore as he was a soldier he would wear if I live, I would strike it out soundly." The king, now indeed the king, does not take up the previous argument, which he was actually in danger of losing. He eventually acknowledges his own role as a king in the former exchange. "'Twas I indeed," he says, "thou promised to strike, and thou hast given me most bitter terms." Williams, now addressing the king himself, does not exactly back down. He says, "Your majesty came not like yourself. You appeared to me but as a common man." And he beseeches pardon for his behavior. So the king fills a glove with crowns for Williams, whether or not thinking he has escaped this argument pretty easily and left the monarchy itself intact, perilously intact. Williams, which is to say Shakespeare, who has written his speeches in these exchanges, has come closer than anyone before or since to a commoner's questioning of a monarch, of the monarchy. If you like my approach to Shakespeare, you can get it in a book from Barnes & Noble. The book is called Crack Nature's Molds. Or you can get it in another book on Shakespeare from Amazon called Broyles, Broils.